On a crisp autumn morning circa 1995, a kid named Jason let me play this game for a few fleeting moments before school. It was the first Metroid game I ever played. At least I think it was, it's been a minute. In 2016, I called it an epic, tarnished by time. And in the years since, something kind of funny happened. I never replayed this original Metroid 2, but my affection for it grew. Whenever I would look back on my time with it, I'd remember all the things I'd enjoyed about it. I'd remember how much of an improvement it was over the original in terms of control and polish. The difference 5 years made in gaming back then was incredible. I would remember the swashbuckling tone of the Surface theme, which is to this day my favorite song in a series overflowing with amazing music. I'd remember how fun and straightforward the Metroid battles were compared to the more drawn-out remakes, and the encroaching feeling of unease as I traveled deeper under the surface. I'd remember the strange, off-kilter nature of its horror, an ambience that neither remake, official or fan-made, could replicate. Honestly, I don't think either one could have replicated it. It was so defined by the Game Boy's limitations. Gunpei Yokoi's design philosophy was lateral thinking with withered technology, and that's where Metroid 2 lives. It's like the difference between watching a scary movie on a bright, crisp modern television versus watching a worn-down VHS with the flickering of that cathode ray tube the only thing illuminating the room. But the memory that endured more than any other was Metroid 2's finale. A long, lonely trek down a tunnel devoid of life, a fierce fight against the beastly Queen Metroid, and an ending so poignant and so beautiful and such a reprieve from all the tension that had come before that it forever altered the trajectory of the Metroid series. Having not played it in nearly 7 years, I remembered all the ways that Metroid 2 was an epic. But I forgot the tarnish. I forgot how much of your time in Metroid 2 involves negotiating your way through a corridor, getting to a room at the end, killing a boss you've killed 10 times before, then turning around and going right back the way you came. I forgot how easy it is to overlook, heck, to never even see a hidden path and a high ceiling in one of those boss rooms, and lose an entire hour running around in circles trying to figure out what you missed. It may be more linear, but it still requires you to circumnavigate back and forth through unnecessarily convoluted paths, to remember where pits of deadly acid used to be, and to remember which pits you've been down before, in order to just make progression. But it's not like the game has changed. I just spent so long not playing it that I accidentally nostalgia-bombed myself. In 2016, I played Metroid 2 on an emulator and freely consulted maps and guides if I got stuck. I wanted it to have the best chance to make the best impression that it could. But in 2023, just like with the last video, I went for authenticity. I allowed myself no outside help. I got lost, I got turned around, I completely missed both the high jump boots and the screw attack because I forgot they were even in the game, which made the Queen Metroid into an absolute nightmare that took many, many attempts to overcome. I played the game on real hardware, on a real cartridge. A cartridge that once belonged to someone named Ruth. I've not suddenly become anti-emulation since 2016. Emulation is what made those original episodes possible, made my love of this series possible, and gave me the incentive to want to buy Ruth's once-owned copy of Metroid 2. I just used to be a guy who was interested in Metroid from a distance. In a sense, I guess I'd been that guy since 1995. But through that process, I became a fan. And that's definitely influencing me too. In 2016, I compared Metroid 2 primarily to its predecessor, which I had played immediately before it. But now, whether I like it or not, I can't help but compare Metroid 2 to how much I now know about the rest of the series, and more particularly to its own remakes. Two titles that are uniquely exemplary in unique ways. Whenever I got lost in the Game Boy game, I had this strange sense of uncanny familiarity. 3 alternate universe versions of the same adventure overlapping on my sense of navigation. I don't think it's all that unusual for some people to pick up a game they haven't played in a long time and find that it doesn't hit the same, but it is very unusual for me. Most of my favorite games are ones that prioritize and emphasize replay value, so I never tend to go more than a year or two without replaying them. It's not often that my memory of what a game is gets so out of sync with what it actually is. but coming back to Metroid 2, my nostalgic memories of it clashed so terribly with what the game was actually like that I found myself questioning how much of that tarnish should really be blamed on time. So I decided to pause the video here, put my money where my mouth was, and replay Metroid 2. I played it again. My desire for authenticity had only grown stronger, so this time I decided to try and replicate the experience I might have had if Jason had let me borrow his copy that day. To that end, I played on the Super Game Boy, an official device that lets you play Game Boy games on a Super NES. In fact, the first time I ever saw Samus Aran was right here in this commercial. I also allowed myself the use of one source of outside help, a book I actually did have in elementary school. Nintendo's official player's guide for the Super Game Boy. This thing freaking rules, by the way. Maybe this is a hot take, but I did not like the original Game Boy. That DMG screen was so dark and so prone to ghosting, this was the only way I could really stand to play Game Boy games before the Pocket came out. Among lots and lots of other fun features, the Super Game Boy lets you customize the colors. There are other videos on Metroid 2 out there, but in how many can you see the Queen Metroid fight with Nintendo's official color palette? More importantly, this book gave me exactly the right amount of information. It told me which areas had which upgrades, but not exactly where those upgrades were. I still had to find them myself, but I was no longer in danger of moving on without them. Having the high jump boots especially made the extremely vertical back half of the game so much more palatable. I find them a bit torn. On the one hand, I kinda love the coarseness of the early Metroid games, how they would just let you skip upgrades like this and not even give you a clue. But on the other hand, something so critical to the map design probably shouldn't have been the sort of thing that a player could have reasonably missed. Like, it's fine if you want to give me a way to sequence break past it, but don't make it something that I could so easily miss in the course of regular progression. Metroid would eventually get better about this, but it was still very early days here. But hey, if you think you don't like a game, just replay it until you do. I was having a way better time. I was in the groove, in the zone, and it didn't seem like long before I had just one more Metroid to go before the end. So here we go, whittling him down, tanking his attacks, and... I ran out of missiles. I was 2 missiles away from beating him, and I ran out of missiles! Oh yeah, I was so mad I went back and looked at my footage and counted. In any other Metroid game, this wouldn't be a big deal. Just pop out of the room, blast a few baddies, restock your set, but no. In Metroid 2, enemies in this last area insistently do not drop missiles. And even if they did, killing an Omega Metroid takes so many that this wouldn't really be feasible. No, the fastest thing I could think of was to wander all the way back to 2 areas ago, climb up here to make contact with this missile battery, and then go all the way back. This detour took almost 20 minutes. Okay, hang on. I wrote this script back in June, and then I made a couple of other much more time-consuming videos, and now I'm back here recording for it, and I am having just the strangest sense of deja vu. Did I have this exact same issue in my original video 7 years ago? This is too weird, I have to check. Here's the problem. There's almost nothing in this penultimate section of the game. Very few enemies to resupply with, absolutely no item upgrades, and no recharge stations. The Omega Metroids take so many hits, it's unreasonable to think that a player would be able to do this without heading all the way back to the last recharge. And that is a lengthy expedition. It took 15 minutes round trip. Oh my god. I knew I'd forgotten the tarnish, but this is just sad. Man, that really tells you just how big of a problem this was for me. I accidentally plagiarized myself. How trendy. So, despite having a better experience on my second go-around, I found myself coming back to the same question. How much of this tarnish is the result of time? And how much of it was always there? This is a search action game where progression isn't gated by equipment upgrades or ability unlocks, it's gated by boss fights. And that means lots, and lots, and lots of recycled boss fights. This is something that both of Metroid 2's remakes struggled to overcome. For what it's worth, I still think the Game Boy original handles that aspect better than either of them, making the fights themselves relatively quick and painless, rather than designing a bigger, badder boss and making the player do that over and over again. Aside from the Omegas, the challenge should be more to find the Metroids, not to repeat the same prolonged fights against them. But both remakes still managed to build a better Metroid game around that structure. And quite frankly, in spite of that structure. To tell the truth, I kinda hate that I feel this way about Metroid 2 now. I often, too often, find myself in the position of advocating for old-school game design, trying to contextualize why this is the way it is, trying to relate how best to approach and hopefully even appreciate the sort of withered technology that I remember being so cutting edge. But it's funny. I used to have no problem saying a game was superannuated, breaking down why I thought someone else's childhood memories didn't hold up to scrutiny. But now it almost goes against my conception of myself to concede that sometimes a game this old really can be hard to go back to. Metroid 2 remains a fascinating experience, and it's worth experiencing. It has so many quiet parts, so many loud parts, so much texture, so much heart. And I'm sure if I replayed it again, if I could just remember where enough of those missile upgrades were, if I could get good enough at those in-game Omega fights that I wouldn't have to go back, I could look past its faults. But I don't know, I got the good ending this time anyway. Some of those faults really have gotten worse with time. Some of them were just always there. I'm sure Samus Returns and AM2R will be more palatable to most players, but the Game Boy original remains, for better and for worse, the most authentic version of itself.